They found the bones before they found the names. Half buried beneath a collapsed porch, tangled with rusted nails and rotted planks, lay a child-sized femur split lengthwise, as if something inside it had tried to push its way out. The wood around it was scorched black, but the bone itself was pale, untouched by flame. When the volunteers lifted it from the dirt, the smell came late, not rot, not death, but something older, metallic, like rain hitting a hot stove. Someone gagged, someone crossed themselves. No one spoke the family's name, because in that hollow, names were dangerous things. The house had burned decades earlier, but the fire never finished its work. It folded inward, collapsing into itself, sealing whatever had lived there into layers of ash and silence. Locals said the screaming that night didn't sound human, not pain, recognition, as if something had finally seen itself clearly and couldn't survive the sight. The records say nothing happened there, no fire report, no death certificates, no missing children. The county maps show an empty patch of land where the trees grow too close together and the ground never quite dries. But the bones say otherwise. The bones always do. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because where this begins matters less than where it echoes. This is not a story that stays put. It moves, it breathes, it passes quietly from one generation to the next, hiding in bloodlines and back rooms and the spaces families refuse to speak about. The hollow sits deep in the Appalachian spine, where West Virginia bends inward on itself like a clenched fist. The road thins to gravel, then dirt, then memory. Old maps mark the place with a name that locals stopped using sometime after the war. Later maps erase it entirely. Census takers skipped it, preachers hurried past it, even hunters avoided the trees, claiming the woods there swallowed sound. In the early 1900s, a single family settled at the edge of that hollow. They arrived without ceremony, without wagons or extended kin, as if they had already been shed by the world once before. The house they built leaned wrong from the start. Its windows faced inward, toward the hill, not outward to the road. Smoke rarely rose from the chimney, yet something always smelled burned. Neighbors noticed the children first, or what they assumed were children, barefoot figures standing too close together, faces slack, eyes unfocused. They didn't wave, they didn't speak. When spoken to, they stared past the sound, as though listening to something behind the speaker's skull. People told themselves it was illness, poverty, mountain ways, anything but what their instincts whispered. At night, lights flickered inside the house, though no lamps were ever purchased. Dogs refused to pass the fence line. Chickens went missing, later found arranged in careful circles, necks twisted but bodies untouched. And through it all, the family remained, silent, watching, breeding. By the time the fire came, the hollow already knew what lived there. The question was never whether it would burn, only what would walk away when it did. The elders claimed the land was wrong long before the family arrived. Old Cherokee trails bent away from the hollow, curving as if to avoid it. Even the creek hesitated there, slowing into a stagnant pool that reflected faces strangely, stretching them, doubling them. When the first cabin went up, it was said the trees leaned inward, branches creaking together at night like ribs closing around a lung. The family's surname appears once in a county ledger from 1912, spelled 3 different ways, then never again. No birth records followed, no marriages, no deaths. The church books carry a single line, later crossed out in thick ink, received into fellowship. Beneath it, written years later in a different hand, removed by discretion of elders. No reason given, none needed. Those who lived nearby remembered the woman who ran the house. She was small, tight-faced, her hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her words came flattened, stripped of warmth. She was never seen with a husband, yet children appeared, first one, then another, then more, always close in age, always too similar. They grew, but not correctly. Limbs too long, heads slightly misshapen, as if the skulls had argued with themselves before settling. Their teeth came in crooked and crowded. Some neighbors said they could hear the children crying at night, but the cries overlapped, voices rising and falling together, until they merged into a single sound that pressed against the hills. During the day, the children wandered the edge of the woods. They did not play, they watched. If a stranger passed, they tilted their heads in unison, eyes tracking movements a moment too late, like reflections lagging behind a mirror. When spoken to, one would open its mouth, then stop, as if waiting for permission. Another would finish the breath. A schoolteacher once tried to intervene. She followed one child home after finding it standing barefoot in the snow, toes purple, eyes empty. When she reached the fence line, she stopped. She later said the air felt thicker there, hard to draw into the lungs. The woman of the house appeared on the porch, smiling without warmth. "They don't need learning," she said. "They already know." The teacher never returned. Inside the house, rituals took shape. Windows were covered, mirrors removed, meals eaten in strict silence. The children sat shoulder to shoulder, movements synchronized, chewing only after the woman chewed, swallowing only after she swallowed. At night, neighbors swore they heard chanting, not words, but breath, counted and matched, inhaled and exhaled, together, as if the house itself were teaching them how to be one thing. Animals avoided the place. Those that didn't were changed by it. Goats born nearby emerged twisted, eyes cloudy, legs bent at impossible angles. Stillborn calves littered the fields that bordered the hollow. Farmers whispered about poisoned ground, about sins buried too deep to rot. But the truth was not in the soil. It was in the blood. By the late 1920s, the children were no longer children. Their bodies matured unevenly, minds stalled and sharpened at once. They understood too much and too little, mimicking adulthood without grasping it. And in the town below, a rumor began to circulate, quiet, careful, lethal. The family tree did not branch. It folded inward. The whisper started with one old man at the tavern, nursing whiskey through cracked lips. He claimed to have seen the children walking together in the snow, but it wasn't their gait that unnerved him. It was their eyes, the same eyes, mirrored, as if one had been pressed into the other's face. They looked alike, yet not twins. Something in their resemblance suggested repetition, a loop of flesh and bone pressed into shape over generations. By the early 1930s, the pattern became undeniable. Neighbors began speaking of the mother, a woman who was at once every woman in the house. Her voice carried across the ridge when the wind turned, a low monotone that seemed to synchronize the children's steps. Some claimed she was also the children's aunt. Others whispered she was their sister, but no ledger confirmed either. The church records were empty, tax rolls listed no dependents, yet the children remained, and the bloodline circled itself in secrecy. Inside the cabin, rules governed existence. Mirrors were removed, replaced with thick black cloth. Windows were obscured, and every surface reflected nothing but shadow. Meals were mise. Urid, portions passed with silent precision. The children's hands moved as if one hand had multiplied into two, catching bowls, setting plates, arranging objects in perfect symmetry. Observation alone could unsettle a visitor. Closer inspection unhinged the mind. Stories surfaced of the children acting older than their age, moving in ways that suggested knowledge too vast for their size. Hunters reported footprints appearing overnight in the woods, two sets, always side by side, perfectly synchronized, walking without breaking rhythm. When followed, the tracks dissolved into brush or simply vanished, as if the earth itself refused to give up its secret. In 1938, a traveling merchant named Malcolm Rowe stumbled upon the cabin while delivering supplies. He claimed the children were on the porch, standing silently, their faces pale as ash. One looked at the trees behind him, the other's eyes, he insisted, seemed to see nothing at all. Later, he wrote a letter to the State Welfare Office describing the scene in careful, trembling script. The report was never assigned a number. It was shelved and forgotten. The children, like the house, were erased on paper, but not in reality. By the 1940s, rumors of unholy practices began to surface in town whispers. Animals found arranged in unnatural positions, objects carved with looping symbols resembling infinity signs, lights flickering at night in the forest, shadows that moved in tandem with the children, though no source could be identified. And always, the same observation, the children never left the edge of the cabin. They were tethered to it, or perhaps to something else, something older than wood and stone. Families around the hollow began to close doors and windows tighter, whispering to children to avoid the ridge. The land itself seemed to repel intruders. Horses halted mid-step, dogs whimpered at the tree line, and men with rifles chose to stay away. Fear did not announce itself in screams, but in careful avoidance, in the slow contraction of daily life around a secret no one dared name. By 1945, the hollow had become a place the town refused to acknowledge. The woman, the one some called mother, others sister, few dared name at all, moved like a shadow through the cabin, her presence taut and small, yet carrying the weight of every secret folded into the walls. The children, now elongated, neither boy nor girl completely, mirrored each other's movements with a precision that unnerved anyone who dared look too closely. Hands lifted together, knees bent together, eyes lowering in synchrony. They were a single organism stretched across two bodies. Hunters reported the humming first, low, resonant, doubling itself in the night air, neither melody nor words. The sound carried through the ridge and seemed to animate the trees. One man claimed to hear the floorboards inside the cabin move in response, a rhythm of steps that matched the hum. Those who went to investigate saw nothing but the cabin sagging under its own age, smoke curling from the chimney though no fire burned, windows dark and silent. By 1948, the first outsiders recorded in official form began to disappear. Sylvie Kincaid, a young social worker, arrived from the state program assigned to isolated families. She entered Hollow Ridge carrying notebooks, canned peaches, and a stubborn faith in reason. By the time the sun fell behind the ridges, she had vanished. Her notes, left behind in fragments, described three figures, two children and a woman, moving in silent choreography, shadows pressing into one another. Her final lines, twisted and broken, read, "They breathe together. I am the only one who blinks." It was in these years that the truth of the bloodline began to surface in whispers, the children's parents, we, rebound in ways the town could not name aloud. The family tree folded back on itself. The mother and aunt were one, or perhaps the sister and mother. The details varied depending on who told the story. What remained consistent was the horror. The blood had circled, generation upon generation, without relief, creating something that should not exist. Neighbors began to speak in code. No one mentioned the children openly. The woman's presence was referred to as the keeper or she of the ridge. Hunters, farmers, and mail carriers developed routes that avoided the hollow entirely. Dogs refused to approach the fence. Chickens and goats vanished or reappeared deformed. Those who lingered too long reported whispers of voices not their own, eyes glimpsed through trees that weren't there, footsteps that matched no known human stride. By 1952, the cabin itself began to crumble. Timbers sagged, shingles peeled, porches tilted as if recoiling from something inside. Yet the children remained, unaging, their hands always together. One local swore he saw them carrying wood in perfect rhythm at dawn, even as the roof above them sagged and threatened collapse. Nothing could deter them from their silent instruction, their mirrored existence. And then the fire came. It was not the blaze of accident or carelessness. It consumed the cabin from the inside, folding walls inward, leaving the trees untouched, smoke pale and coppery. When authorities arrived, all they found were the scorched remains, two small sets of footprints pressed into soot leading away into the forest, and fragments of bone that whispered the truth the town had tried to forget. The fire did not erase them. It revealed what had always existed in secret. The cabin's timbers had collapsed inward, as though devouring themselves, leaving the forest untouched, the soil unmarked. Among the ashes lay a child's leather its laces melted to thin strings, a fragment of jawbone, teeth crooked and unrecorded in any registry. And the footprints, two sets, side by side, pressed into soot, delicate and perfect, walking away from the ruin and into the forest where no path existed. They were gone, yet the evidence of their presence remained, haunting in its clarity. Investigators could not explain it. No adult remains, no sign of the woman who had presided over the hollow for decades. The sheriff noted the strange letter that arrived days later, typed on a machine, untraceable, unsigned. Its message brief, "The blood goes in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun." No explanation, no claim of responsibility, only certainty in the phrasing, as though the message itself were alive, echoing through the woods. Local memory turned inward, sealing itself in stone and silence. Families spoke in whispers, never aloud. Children were warned not to follow the sound of footsteps at night, not to peer too closely at still water, not to linger where the forest pressed too heavily. Some salted their thresholds, hung iron over doors. These were not superstitions, but rituals of survival, a recognition that Hollow Ridge carried rules the town could not name and could not bend. Decades passed. The ridge grew over. The cabin's foundation became nothing more than earth and bramble. Deer wandered freely, streams ran unchecked, but hikers and surveyors occasionally reported seeing something. Two figures in white, walking side by side barefoot, disappearing into the tree line. Drone footage captured shapes too perfect to be coincidence. Static would claim the feed when the camera drew too close. Footprints, faint but exact, pressed into soil where no living child could have reached. By the 1980s, historians and folklorists began to piece together the fragments. Photographs from county archives, letters long forgotten, and journal entries of Sylvie Kincaid told a story of generational decay, of a family that refused the natural flow of life and blood. DNA could not verify what had happened. The hollow was its own record, preserved in silence, in ritual, in the twin faces that reflected one another in photographs and memory. The children became legend, yet the legend is rooted in something undeniable. Pale, unaging, always paired, they moved through the hollow as if the earth itself had shaped them. The fire, the letters, the footprints, they were warnings, a demonstration that the bloodline had circled, inward and unbroken, creating beings no ledge could contain, no church could acknowledge, no law could name. Locals now speak of the ridge only when necessary, passing down fragments to the next generation. Hunters, hikers, and loggers know the cautionary tales. They do not linger. And if the wind carries the hum of breath or the shimmer of movement among the pines, they leave it be. The children, whatever they have become, are no longer of the town, nor of the state, nor of any paper record. They belong to Hollow Ridge. By the early 1990s, technology began to pierce the veil the hollow had maintained for decades. Surveyors, mapping the ridge for logging operations, stumbled across fragments of the past. Beneath the overgrowth, they found brittle bones, partial rib cages, warped skulls of children. Forensic analysis confirmed human origin, age roughly 9 years, yet nothing aligned with missing person reports. No names, no records. Only the echo of what had been burned and what had walked away. One deputy, speaking off the record, remarked, "It looked like the head wanted to mirror itself." The words lingered long after the bones were collected, seared into local memory. The ridge, long avoided, began to attract the curious. Underground forums and small video recordings circulated images of the forest, the clearing where the cabin once stood. The footage rarely showed much: tree trunks, bramble, sunlight falling in fragments, but occasionally a flash of white would move among the pines. Two figures walking side by side, faces obscured, barefoot, impossible to track. Skeptics called it trick of light, digital error. Believers called it confirmation. Those who lived in Leslie County, however, understood the silence. They knew the ridge carried rules older than modern record-keeping, and those rules were enforced by something that had never needed words. The letters from the 1950s resurfaced over the years. Nee, in 1999, found tucked inside a donated Bible at the Hayden Public Library, bore a single sentence: "Ashes circle, blood remembers." Typed in faded ink, anonymous, it echoed the 1954 letter with a precision that unsettled even seasoned historians. Copies circulated quietly. The ridge became legend, but the legend carried weight. It was not merely story, it was a warning. Every local knew it, even if the younger generations only glimpsed the tale in fragmentary whispers. Hikers reported footsteps behind them at dusk, small prints, side by side, appearing on soft soil where no child could have walked unnoticed. Some claimed they heard humming, doubling itself as it drifted across hollowed trees, a sound without beginning or end. Drone footage in the 2000s occasionally caught two indistinct forms walking in perfect symmetry, only to vanish when the lens drew closer. The forest, it seemed, was both refuge and prison for them. They had left the cabin, but the ridge itself had become their domain, and it would not yield them to curiosity. Those who tried to understand the mirror children through reason or science found themselves frustrated. Archives held photographs but no names. Records held letters but no signatures. Forensic reports noted bones but could not confirm identities. The land itself preserved what the human eye could not. Steps in the dirt, marks in soot, echoes in fog. These were the evidence that survived, stubborn against obliteration. The ridge, it seemed, remembered in ways the town could not. Yet among the few willing to speak, a consensus emerged. The blood had circled too tightly to be human. Generations folded upon themselves, creating a lineage that could not age normally, could not be catalogued, could not be named. The children were not ghosts, not spirits, but something else, an imprint of familial decay, a repetition of flesh and bone shaped into unnatural symmetry. Their story endured not because anyone documented it properly, but because the land remembered, and the land refused to forgive. By the turn of the millennium, Hollow Ridge had become both a place of fear and fascination. Amateur explorers, armed with camcorders and drones, ventured where locals dared not tread. Most recorded only the dense foliage, the bramble-choked trails, the ruins of the cabin foundation buried under years of decay. Yet every so often, the lens captured something that defied explanation. Two pale figures, walking side by side, barefoot, their movements unnaturally synchronized, gliding across the clearing as if following a rhythm that existed beyond human understanding. The camera would blur, static would flare, and when the signal returned, the figures were gone. Footage spread quietly online, first in small forums, then through viral threads. Skeptics debated lighting, glitch, hoax, but the locals knew. In Leslie County, stories persisted, whispered over fireplaces and across tavern tables. Grandparents warned grandchildren not to follow the ridge after dusk, not to lean too close to the water, not to listen too closely when the forest hummed. The ridge had rules, and those who ignored them did so at their own peril. One retired teacher recounted dreams of twin figures standing at the foot of her bed, pale as ash, eyes reflecting light like mirrors. She awoke to muddy footprints across her floorboards, 2 sets, perfectly matched, only to find them reappearing the next morning. She moved away within a month, never returning. The ridge, now overgrown, held evidence of its past in subtle, haunting ways. Scorched earth where the fire had inwardly consumed the cabin, twisted fragments of wood, windows sealed against sunlight, footprints pressed into soil, appearing and disappearing as if the land itself obeyed a different law. Visitors reported the smell of copper in the air, a faint tang that lingered long after they left. Hikers would hear footsteps behind them, only to see nothing. Sometimes, a soft hum floated through the trees, too precise, too mirrored, to belong to human vocal cords. Scholars and folklorists attempting to document Hollow Ridge faced the same barrier. Photographs existed, but no names. Letters, unsigned, suggested knowledge and warning. Bones had been recovered, but none could be identified. The land itself preserved the narrative, leaving fragments for those attentive enough to see them. Prints, hums, traces of presence. Attempts to map or study the ridge were met with failure. The forest rejected intrusion, or perhaps it preserved its own order, one that had nothing to do with human understanding. By this time, the mirror children had become legend, yet the legend was inseparable from truth. Pale, unaging, always paired, moving in perfect symmetry, they existed as a reflection of the bloodline that had circled inward for generations. Inbreeding, secrecy, isolation, these had shaped them, folded them into something beyond the normal, beyond the ledger and census, beyond recognition. Hollow Ridge remembered, and in remembering, it enforced a boundary. Those who strayed too close, whether by curiosity or chance, felt it immediately. The air thickened, the forest stilling, footsteps echoing in twin precision, as if the land itself had aligned to mirror the children's existence. In 1987, a genealogist named Harold Wexler came to Leslie County chasing an absence. He was not drawn by stories, but by gaps, surnames that appeared once and then collapsed into nothing, bloodlines that terminated without death. His work focused on forgotten families, the ones that slip between census years and church books. Hollow Ridge drew his attention because it behaved like a woe. In the archive, everything around it recorded normally. That land did not. Wexler rented a room in Hayden and spent weeks in the courthouse basement, breathing mold and dust, tracing property lines that ended abruptly. He found the burned-out fire audit with the location missing. He found letters logged without case numbers. He found photographs of children with no names written on the back, their faces too similar, eyes wrong in the same way. When he laid the images side by side, he noticed something that made his hands shake. The faces did not age forward. They repeated. The same structure resurfaced every 20 years, reshaped but unchanged, like a mold reused too many times. One night he walked Hollow Ridge alone. He later wrote that the forest felt expectant, not hostile, waiting. Near the clearing he found footprints pressed into damp soil, 2 sets, bare, child-sized, fresh. He followed them only a few steps before the air tightened in his chest and a low hum began, doubling itself until he could no longer tell if it came from the woods or from inside his own skull. He left without collecting samples. In his notes he wrote only this: the blood did not end. It learned how to move. Wexler never published his findings. His research box was donated after his death, sealed for 30 years at his request. When it was opened, one item was missing. The photographs were gone. What remains now is not proof, but persistence. The ridge still repels development. The county still refuses to sell the land, and people still report seeing 2 figures at dusk, standing where the cabin once folded into itself, barefoot, pale, waiting. Not hiding, waiting. The family that should not exist was never erased. It was dispersed, folded into soil, into breath, into memory. A bloodline that refused to branch learned instead how to echo, and that leaves only one question, whispered where no one wants to answer it aloud.